This podcast is made possible by Planful.
Hello, this is Nipun Soni, the CFO at Billion to One, and you are listening to CFO Thought Leader Podcast.
This is episode 850.
And I think the combination of strategy and finance are that's the intersection that I enjoy the most, which gives you the ability to think about both the short term and the long term, but all in one continuum. You're not trying to maximize one over the other, but you're trying to maximize both for the firm over the long period of time. And that's what I found over the years most exciting. So before I took the CFO role, I had a dual role, and I was the controller. So I had all of our global CFOs in my organization, accounting, external reporting, etc., but also served as the chief strategy officer for the firm. And that gave me a really unique and broad perspective on the business before stepping into the CFO role. But it's that intersection.
Hi, it's Jack. On today's show, we speak with Anat Ashkenazi, CFO of Eli Lilly. In March of 2020, when Eli Lilly announced it would begin providing drive-through COVID testing services to the state of Indiana's healthcare workers, more than a few hospital administrators likely scratched their heads. After all, the giant pharma company was not in the business of providing healthcare services, nor was Lilly a medical device manufacturer. For Anat Ashkenazi, who would be named CFO of Lilly within 12 months of COVID's arrival in North America, the pandemic would become the ultimate testing ground, and not just for the virus. Eli Lilly's CFO explains why, and much more. On today's episode, we begin after this. With so much change around us and your need for increasing agility, you have to equip your team to win, and you have to do it now. Join over 1,300 companies of all sizes using Planful to help plan and execute with greater confidence. Planful integrates your critical financial processes to serve the data you need, insights you demand, and the answers necessary to manage your business optimally. Planful lets you plan better, close faster, and report more accurately. And Planful's not just for finance and accounting. It's for the entire business to plan, collaborate, and drive increased financial performance. Take full control of how you administer and manage all of your financial processes and data. And put finance first collaboration at the heart of every decision. When finance is a team sport, you can be a champion. With Planful, you'll be a champion of finance. Get in the game by going to planful.com to learn more. Hello, we're speaking with Anat Ashkenazi, CFO of Eli Lilly. Anat, welcome.
Thank you, Jack. It's great to be on the podcast today.
So, Anat, we always begin by asking our guests to look back for us and trying to identify some of those experiences they feel prepared them for a finance leadership role. What comes to mind for you?
You know, it's a question I get asked quite often. Which role best prepared you to be the CFO in the CFO position? And I always think it's not a single experience or single role that I've had in the past that best prepared me. And especially for the CFO role, given that the CFO is such a broad role that cuts across the entire organization and is the leadership role both internally and externally representing the company. I view my experience over the past 25 years as the set of experiences that have best prepared me for this job by primarily building on each of the roles that I've had. And that's in every role that I took, that's how I looked at the roles is how am I accumulating and building that set of experiences so I'm best positioned for broader, bigger roles in the organization. So I view it as this kind of accumulating over years. Now, having said that, one of the things that I found important throughout my career is I've had the opportunity to do a role outside of finance. So oftentimes we think of financial leaders as people that have grown in the organization, the finance component, and have kind of moved up in rank in different financial roles. And while that was the case for me in the sense that I did have a broad range of roles within the organization, I did spend about 5 years, maybe a little longer actually, in what we call here at Lilly, we call these cross-functional roles. So these are roles outside of your original home function, where you serve as a business leader somewhere else in the organization. And having the opportunity to do that, and still as a business leader, you still engage with financial leadership. Obviously, you're thinking about the business, but it gives you a different perspective. You sit it's almost like you're on the other side of the table, but you sit in a different part of the organization, looking at the business from a different perspective. And you learn things that I think otherwise could be a little more difficult, not impossible, but just a little more difficult to learn firsthand when you're just doing financial roles. Again, if someone thinking that their entire career has been in finance, and is that a barrier? It by no means it is. It isn't. You can still develop fantastic set of experiences that would allow you to sit in the CFO role and do very well without having that. But I do find, and speaking to colleagues, when people have that experience, whether they led a business unit, or they've done a marketing job, or they've stepped down to a strategy job, that experience builds your skill set in a more comprehensive way.
That's a interesting insight for us. I wanted to point out to our audience, you've been with Eli Lilly about 21 years. I think you joined in 2001.
That's right.
Did you join in the States, or were you in another city around the world?
So I spent, you're right, about 21 years with Lilly, and started my career actually in Israel in financial services, in banking and debt rating, and then moved to Lilly in a role that was not in finance back then, and it was venture capital. So Lilly embarked in 2000, decided to go into the corporate venture capital space and invest in earlier stage startup companies. The interesting thing is we were even off-site. We were not at the corporate center, in a different location, creating a different environment and culture for investment in startup companies in 2000 and then 2001 when I joined.
Deal making was a big part of your career. Was it the first 10 years?
No, it was just really the start when I joined the company, and then I quickly moved outside of the business development organization. So I actually spent a fairly short period of time on the business development side, and then moved into strategy, Six Sigma, and then more traditional CFO roles within our organization, CFO for our divisions. So deal making wasn't necessarily the lion's share of my career, but it's obviously something that I now do on a regular basis.
Is it something you enjoyed? I'm curious as to what parts of the business you found the most satisfying. And then a follow-up question would be, why is that? How does it appeal to your professional skills, or your, who you are?
Let me answer it both on the professional side and personal side. What I enjoy the most, and I remember sharing this with someone years ago before I obviously moved into the CFO role or even one of the vice president's role, I always found finance to be interesting because it's kind of the core driver for the business. Maybe not the core driver in terms of, the revenue, et cetera, but it's an engine that we use within the organization. But I love strategy. And I think the combination of strategy and finance that's the intersection that I enjoy the most, which gives you the ability to think about both the short term and the long term, but all in one continuum. You're not trying to maximize one over the other, but you're trying to maximize both for the firm over the long period of time. And that's what I found over the years most exciting. So before I took the CFO role, I had a dual role, and I was the controller. So I had all of our global CFOs in my organization, accounting, external reporting, et cetera, but also served as the chief strategy officer for the firm. And that gave me a really unique and broad perspective on the business before stepping into the CFO role. But it's in that intersection. Now, I will say, from a personal standpoint, having served as the CFO for most of our global divisions, I served years ago, I was the CFO for our global oncology business. And what we do at Lilly, we produce products and medicines that save or improves people's life in a really meaningful way in everything we do, whether it's a drug for diabetes patients or a patient with cancer, or a patient with rheumatoid arthritis. There's just a vast number of diseases that we treat. But when I was in oncology, we always have something that just is closer to home for us. And I wish oncology wasn't that case for all of us. I wish, none of us knew someone with cancer because we cured it, but that's not the case. And for me, it was just closer to home and was very meaningful. It was really meaningful being part of that organization. And these are moments, I think we all ask about moments in our career that we will never forget. These were some of the moments when in our oncology division was some of the moments I will never forget. I remember where I sat, which building, when we had data readouts for certain products, and you look at the data and on the board, it's a curve, it's a set of numbers and it's a graph. That behind it are people that are now going to live longer. They're going to have more moments with loved ones, and we're going to enable it. And that's, you sit in these moments and you're a financial person, you're the CFO, but you're in awe of just the data and the work that our scientists do every day. And that for me, just from a personal standpoint, was just incredibly meaningful.
You talked about sort of the cross-functional roles that executives will be assigned to on the way up. And I'm curious, can you give us a sense of the variety of roles that you might have played? I guess different areas of the business is what we're talking about.
So I'll share my experience, but also what we do here at Lilly, because we're very intentional about people development. That's one of the core, actually one of the key areas of focus for me as well, for my team, is how do I develop leaders that can lead in today's environment, tomorrow's environment. And one of the things that I try to ensure they have is that they do have a broad perspective and understanding of the business. And one of the ways to do it is to rotate them between divisions. The other is to try and embed them in an area that's outside of finance. So they may we have individuals that sometimes take a sales assignment. So they go out and they meet with physicians. They know what our customers care about and what questions they have, provides them with great opportunity. They may do a strategy role. So that's what I had. I sat in our strategy organization for about 5 years. And then, as I mentioned, later on took the role as the lead for that organization. And we do strategy at Lilly for the entire company. So it's centralized. So it will cut across research, development, manufacturing, commercialization, the general and administrative functions. It will touch subjects such as the most important things we may work through as an organization, patent expiries, markets we would go after, therapeutic areas we would pursue. So what it does, in addition to the perspective and learning on the business, because you're leading something else every couple of months, you get that learning agility. You practice that, kind of move into something new that's completely foreign to you every several months, and you have to learn it, right? So, for example, we asked ourselves a few years ago at the start of the pandemic, should we enter the space of virology as a therapeutic area? We answered no. And it's, I'm sure most companies in the industry ask them that question. But when you're sitting and you have to answer that and you're not the expert, you have to learn that very quickly. And I think that's a skill set and that's a muscle that as a leader, if you practice it more and more, you become just better, because we all see this. The world around us is not as static by any means. And in fact, if we just look at the last 2 years, I think most of us would not have predicted some of the things that have happened. And that ability to tackle things that come your way, just unpredictable events, I think that's an important skill set, is to be able to learn how to respond very quickly.
We've interviewed a good number of CFOs from smaller pharma companies or startup pharma communities that came out of large pharma. It occurs to us that there were opportunities for you to do the same. You stayed. Why? No doubt it was opportunities that were in front of you, but maybe it speaks to another part of your nature. Don't know.
Yeah, and it partially it's personal, right? We all have different preferences. But the other part, and I think that's the key question, is, oftentimes we get asked, why did you join an organization? I think the most important thing is, why did you choose to stay in an organization? And especially for financial professional, you can go and do this job anywhere. And it doesn't even have to be the same industry. These are completely transferable skills. certainly there's benefit in understanding industry in depth, but being able to leverage the skill set of a financial leader is something you can do across multiple industries. So I view this, my choice, as well as the choice of many of my team members to stay here every day is proactive. It's not just because we're here. It's because we choose to stay here. And for me, it's really probably three things. One is what we do, which has become even more important for me over time. And maybe it's, I get older and you have family and you understand the impact, the global impact that companies in our business can have. We, for example, are going to be impacting 50 million patients. We're estimating 50 million patients this year will be taking one of our medications. Multiplied by the, families, an average family size, and you realize the global impact we have. So that's the first thing, is what we do. We do truly, in my mind, critical, noble work. The second is what opportunities you have within the firm. So, and that does vary. People have different career aspirations and desires. For me, the organization has always enabled me to take that next step and jump into roles that I've had, I wouldn't say no preparation for, but I've never done this before, right? So the organization bet on me in at multiple stages of my career. Fortunately, it worked well every time, but I really enjoy that. And the view that we see employees as our core asset, and the investments we make in employees is quite significant from a career development perspective. So that's the second thing. The third, and today probably one of the more important factors for me, is who I work with. And I say this to newer employees, people coming out of college or they just got their MBA. And we will, people who have career aspirations that they want to get to higher level positions in the organization. You'll be working hard. You may have long hours on occasion. And you want to know that you're walking into an office building, or if you're sitting at home and you're on a Zoom call, with people that truly, truly value you as a person. They care about you as a person and as a career professional, and they're willing to invest in you as a person. And that is so critical. That's the one thing I think that would take me out of an organization, is if I felt that I was in an environment that does not cultivate that and doesn't allow that to occur. But I think if you walk the halls of Lilly, that's one thing that you truly feel about this organization. I always say it's kind of an organization with a beating heart. It's a company where you have individuals, and I think there's a bias in selection as well, who truly care about each other. And it's not just in terms of investing in someone's career. It's just on the personal side, whether it's, I remember years ago, it's you go out and you pick someone's child from daycare because they're stuck somewhere, or you're helping a colleague who's dealing with other difficulties. But that means a lot, because we do spend a significant portion of our waking hours at work. And you want to know that you spend it with a group that you care about and they care about you as well.
Nice. Thank you for that. One of the milestones that we have touched on with several finance leaders is one you'll never find really on a resume. But as they look back, it's popped up more than once. And curious whether it's a milestone for you, as it is for so many others. The first time you might have presented to the board. I'm intrigued by when that might have happened in your career. Did it happen the last 5 years? Did it happen the first 10 years for whatever reason? There was an opportunity where a CFO tapped you on the shoulder and said, we could have you take a deeper dive here and discuss this with the board. Anything like that?
So I had these moments throughout my career. I think they become really important early on in your career, when you have these opportunities and someone taps you on the shoulder and says, come do this. And sometimes people, it can be very stressful for individuals when you're asked to do something you've never done before. And maybe, as you said, you're presenting to the board, or you're presenting to what we call our executive committee. So this is the CEO and the senior leaders. And maybe you're at the bottom of the organization, you're an associate. Maybe you've been with the company for a year or two, and, it can be a little stressful. But it's an opportunity. And my view and my approach throughout my career had been, if a door opens, you walk through it. And you do your best. And you may fail, or you may succeed, prepare for success. don't fear the failure, which is easier said than done. So I do remember when you've asked the question, it's funny because immediately a moment flashed in front of my eyes where someone did tap me on the shoulder. And this was years ago. And I was probably with the company 2 years, probably less than 2 years. And the request was to come in and present to the senior management team. It wasn't the board, but it was the senior management team. And a topic that was not necessarily straightforward. So controversial. People have opinions and personal stake at this. And how do you do this? And I took this on and I walked into the room, and I was obviously the most junior person in the room and much younger than everyone else and far less experienced than those in the room. But I knew my data, and which is important, is you know your stuff. And I answered the questions, and whatever question came my way, I addressed it the best I could. And it could be a little stressful in the moment, but you have to put that aside and just kind of move forward. And I don't know if that was transformation or not, but certainly what it did is it put me in front of senior leaders, and you're early in your career, but it demonstrates that one, you're willing to do it. And second, you can do it and you come prepared. And I think that's meaningful. And I've had those few other opportunities like that, again, earlier in my career, which I think were helpful. And one of the things that we do here at Lilly is we do career assessment, career evaluation, or talent evaluation. And we do it throughout your career. We would evaluate how someone continues to develop. One of the things we have been talking about is that you can typically identify people very early on in their career. And I think if we went back and you looked at the CEO, when did someone identify that, this person has tremendous potential? You don't know where they will get to, but you feel that they will go far. And, my advice to people is understand that these moments happen, and people do evaluate you and it's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It's not criticism, but it's, do you have the potential? Can we develop you even further? So when these opportunities do come up, I would say take them on. And if it's very stressful for someone, find someone to practice this with before you walk into the room, but don't overthink it. In most cases, I find these opportunities when someone is well prepared, they do fine.
I want to just, before we move to the business discussion, wanted to just ask you about investor relations, whether that was a stop on the way up. Was there an investor relations tour of duty, or how did you get the exposure to that function?
So investor relation was not a role I held before taking the CFO role. And that's advice I now give people because it's incredibly important and probably growing in importance that someone has that experience of how do you communicate with investors in Wall Street. I did have that exposure. It wasn't a role, but this is one of the set of opportunities that were given to me over the years. So, for example, when I first took the role as the CFO for a global oncology business, I joined at that point our CFO and went on the road with him for several days, meeting with investors, morning till evening every day. And I represent the business. I represented the oncology business. And that was the kind of the first opportunity where it wasn't just one meeting, but it was truly multiple days of having interactions with investors. And that's incredibly valuable. I encourage people now to do it more often. I take my CFOs with me when I go and meet with investors because I want them to have the opportunity to hear what's on their mind, what's on investors' mind, what questions they ask. What are they concerned about? What are they excited about? And I also ask them these questions. But getting that experience is incredibly helpful. What I did when I took this job within the first probably 3 months or so, which was incredibly helpful, I went on what we call listening tour. And it was virtual. I moved into the CFO role during the pandemic, so we couldn't meet in person, which is a shame, but we did it online through a virtual means. And I met with most of our largest shareholders for 30 minutes call, so very quick. But my intention there was not just to introduce myself, but really listen to them. I wanted to understand from their perspective, what are they thinking about when they think about Lilly? What concerns them? What excites them? What questions they have? And I also asked them, how do we communicate with you? Do you find our methods of communications beneficial? Would you like to hear more or less for us in a different way, in a different format? So it was an opportunity for me to get feedback from them. We often think about CFOs and investors as, the CFO sitting and answering questions from investors, but this was an opportunity for me to do the reverse. And I learned a great deal from those several months of just doing that, listening to and talking to investors, and hopefully they benefited from it as well because they had a chance to get to know me early in the CFO role. So that was incredibly beneficial. And now it's obviously a regular part of my job. It's quite a significant portion of my job. It's not just investors, but it's the external community, representing Lilly, representing the organization in multiple forums. Incredibly important. And my advice to any CFO who may be listening or someone who wants to get to the CFO position, do it early. Try to get that experience. It's valuable. And we're fortunate. We have outstanding set of long-term investors who understand, appreciate the business, and analysts that cover us who understand this business very well. So it's also enjoyable to have these conversations and have the opportunity to talk about the business.
So, like the detail around how the investors, you wanted to hear what the investors thought of Lilly, what sets it apart, what's different about it. And that's a question we like to ask finance leaders. What sets Lilly apart from the other pharma giants out there? What is it exactly?
So we are all engaged in providing meaningful benefits to patients through the drug we produce, we discover, develop, and manufacture. So I think we all do really incredible work, and there are some outstanding companies out there. What I find unique about Lilly is the people we have. And I think, that's a focal area for us. I mentioned earlier the importance of the people you work with. But I do think we put an emphasis on hiring the best and retaining the best. And that second portion of retention is equally important to bring someone in. You want them to stay. You want them to grow with the organization. And you want them to be able to do meaningful work. And I think that does set us apart. This focus on innovation. We've had a strategy in the organization that we haven't changed for many years. In fact, we know what our North Star is. We've been working towards the same strategy. And we iterate kind of around the edges, which is that ability to, be agile and understand what's going on and tweak and adjust and focus on the important things. But the core strategy, the essence of what we do hasn't changed. And that is really important. We actually went back, and I don't know how many companies do this, but we studied this. So we did not assume we're the best. In fact, we said what had been our strategy over the years, what have been others' company strategies, how does it compare? In some cases, we're similar. In some cases, we're different. But we wanted to understand where are we different and we want to stay different, or the same, we want to stay the same, or what are the things we may want to change. But then we took a second step, which I thought was incredibly important. We also look at how we execute work in Lilly. And we looked at successes and failures. And we've learned from that. We created this set of learnings that said, what are the things that you want to focus on when you lead a major change or an initiative to ensure it's successful. But we're very thoughtful about learning from our own mistakes and successes. And we don't shy from that. And we revisit that every so often. It's not a wholesale change in the organization. I would say, 99% of the people should focus on what they need to deliver that day, that week, that month for patients. But we always have a group that looks at, what questions do we need to ask ourselves? Do we have the right people? Do we have the right skill set? So I think the combination of people and being very thoughtful about how we deliver the work is what sets us apart.
Approach, again, you entered in the CFO office in 21, in the middle of the pandemic, really. Now, has that approach been altered or enhanced in terms of the questions you're asking? Did the pandemic in any way impact that approach to that sort of early planning, asking the right questions?
What the pandemic taught us, I think more so than anything else, is that there are things we can't predict. None of us could have predicted where we were going to be throughout that pandemic and just the length of time that it would take us to get to where we are today. And that's an important learning. We have a process internally by which we look at kind of the things that can happen. Now, you can only envision what you know, right? You don't know what you don't know. So we do a very detailed work around that, and we, assume things happen. We assume failures in multiple areas. We assume risks materialize, et cetera. And it's for planning purposes only, so that we're prepared. We don't change necessarily all of our actions, but that we know what we would do in case, you name what it is. And what we learn through this process, you can't predict precisely what will happen. So that's not worth worrying about. But what you can predict is that something will happen. And then you create what we call kind of an envelope of potential mitigation actions that you would take regardless of what those actions are. So that's, and we fine-tune it during the pandemic, because actually when we were at the beginning of the pandemic, we went through this process in April 2020. And I think most of us thought that this would be behind us very quickly, and it wasn't. But as part of this exercise, we ran through the drill of what if it isn't? What if it takes multiple years? What if it drives hyperinflation? What if it drives global recession? So we asked that question, and I think what we learned during the pandemic is that process is one we don't want to lose. It's sharpened that importance for us of doing this on a regular basis.
In such a large company, I usually ask about the numbers you look at before your first cup of coffee in the morning. I just imagine you're observing the markets, you're observing what's happening in the economy daily. But what else are you looking at daily when it comes to this company performing the way you want it to?
Yes, so I assume very much like all my peers, I look at our sales daily. You're right, it's almost the first thing I look at in the morning, our daily sales report. But then beyond that, I want to understand what's happening in the marketplace. That's one of the things I live about 40 minutes away from the office. And one of the benefits of driving in for 40 minutes, whether you're sitting in a car or I'm sitting in a car or you're sitting on public transportation, I use that time to kind of stay up with things that are going on. So I do listen to the news in the morning as I drive in. It's my way to connect. It's my best thinking time when I come into the morning is listen to the news. And there's a specific channel that I like to listen to in the morning because I find that they bring a diverse set of issues to that program in the morning. And that's a good way to kind of just keep up with everything. Obviously, you read the news when you come into the office. But from a daily perspective, it's interesting. And I'm sure it's the same for many CFOs. If you look at the calendar of my calendar, daily calendar, or a CFO's calendar, it changes daily. And there are things that are going to be unpredictable, but there are going to be business development activities. There is going to be monitoring of commercial activities. There are going to be manufacturing decisions. There are going to be commercial contracts. There are going to be so many things that I do that span our entire business in a single day. Sometimes in 3 hours or 4 hours. And it's just that ability to connect with each part of our value chain that ensures that I stay informed of what's going on in the business. It's not a single source of data. It's truly across the business.
Finance leaders will often use the phrase digital transformation and how they're transforming their businesses using digital technologies. What part of Eli Lilly, where is digital transformation having an impact inside Lilly or how Lilly operates? What do you think?
So digital is across the business. We call it scaling with digital. And the reason we call it scaling with digital is when we look at the outlook for Lilly more specifically, we see the tremendous growth opportunity. And we've shared this with investors December of last year. We said we expect to be one of the fastest growing companies in the business. And to do that, there are different ways to grow. You can add manufacturing sites, you can add offices, you can add people, you can add sales reps, etc. Or you find a way where you integrate digital in every part of the business so that while you still grow the infrastructure some, you don't scale it up to the same level revenue grows. You scale it up to a much, much reduced level. So we've actually embarked on this a couple of years ago to look at where can we integrate digital across our business. And it's both data and visibility to data, which we now have. So for example, you asked earlier about data sources. I have a dashboard, which is on my iPad, where I can access it daily and I can look at sales in any country in the world for every single product. And I can look at our expenses. So things are at our fingertips where I don't think they were. And coupled with that visibility, we also have predictive models that would tell me on each day of the month where we're going to end the month. And we have multiple predictive models that anchor on different things. So I can kind of toggle between them. But we integrate them in, we integrate digital, and I would say it's digital and advanced analytics, all the way from research through our commercial organization. For example, during the pandemic, we had to change the way we did clinical trials to some extent because we didn't have patients go into an investigator site. They couldn't, or they were limited. And we had to get to them. We had to find a way where we do it in a more digital, virtual fashion, which we did. And now it's part of how we run our clinical trials. You can introduce some predictive analytics into the research tools so you know what to focus on. Certainly, if you think about manufacturing organization like pharmaceuticals, where, you know, when we build a manufacturing site, it's a $500 million to $1 billion investment, so it's quite significant. Preventive maintenance. So you introduce a predictive analytics tool to drive reduction in the cost of your maintenance activity because you have better visibility, all the way to the commercial side, where instead of a sales rep just going out and meeting with their physician on the list, they have better visibility to physicians' prescribing behavior, preferences based on a set of tools that we're using. So when they go and have that conversation, it's a data-driven conversation, which we didn't have in the past. And then across our, what I call support functions, finance, procurement, legal, compliance, et cetera, the introduction of tools, for example, in my audit function, thinking of how instead of we do in-person audits, right? So we send a team out to a country and they do an affiliate audit, for an example. But we do that once a year. What happens in the rest of the other 11 months that we're not there? How do we establish a process in place in which we have done, where we have ongoing auditing, right? So we get red flags that something's wrong and we may want to send someone over and look at something. So I just see it as, it's not as separate. I think if, you know, we had this conversation 10 years ago, people saw it as a separate initiative somewhere on the side, where now it's literally integrated into the fabric of just how we scale and run our business.
I love the illustration of the sales rep who's able to access information that they couldn't to make better decisions or respond to a customer in a certain way that they wouldn't have been informed about before. Wondering if there's some part of the organization or maybe a group similarly where you realize they would benefit from having additional information or a particular metric that the finance team realized was quite revealing, and if only this group could begin monitoring this more closely. I guess I'm looking for a nice and simple anecdote. I'm sure there's not one, but anything come to mind?
You know, if I had a quick anecdote, I would tell you we would have acted on it immediately. When we see something that we think is meaningful, then we try to deliver it. Now, it does take time.
Yep.
So, you know, one of the things that I find helpful is how do you integrate the financial data I mentioned earlier is kind of at our fingertips today. And as a company, we're a global one instance of SAP, so all of our organization it's easier to extract the data. How do we combine commercial data? So what the reps are doing, for example, in the field into that data set. So we see the entire company in one dashboard. So I'll give you an example. You walk into a manufacturing site, one of our newer manufacturing site, and you may have this huge monitor walking in that shows you production and maybe where issues are, or, you know, how fast things are going. And that's incredibly important for a site head right now. Obviously, they don't need to just look at that monitor. They have that information, but it's just kind of an illustration of how do you get that one dashboard so you know quickly what to look at, or if something happens, or if something is derailed. It's easier to look at lagging metrics, which we all do, and sales metrics is a lagging metric, right? What we saw today is a lagging metric. It's not a leading metric. So my focus now is shifting to what are those leading indicators that I want to integrate more into decision making, because then you truly can make much more informed decisions. So for example, for sales, we look at a metric called new to brand prescription. And it's a leading indicator for how much we're going to sell in the future, because these are new patients getting on drug for the first time. That's a good leading indicator. It's partially automated. It'd probably be good to integrate it more, but now we're using it as a predictive tool. And when we use it as a predictive tool, it not just informs our, my targets for the year or guidance that we set out in terms of what the revenue will be. It informs our manufacturing organization of what they would need to produce and how much we need to scale up. And obviously you want to do it ahead of time. But these are some of the few examples that, where we would look for more leading indicator, not just relying on lagging indicators.
Thank you for that. Some great insight for us. We like to ask what we refer to as a finance strategic moment. And this is just a moment of insight that you experienced during the course of your career. Might have been in the early days at Eli Lilly. Might have been just a couple of weeks back. But it's a moment of insight that you had as a finance person, someone with lines of sight into the business, similar to what we're talking about here, and you were able to respond to it. And whether it was avoiding a risk, not doing something, going forward with a deal, not going forward with a deal, or some other sort of business related aspect. Anything come to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
Yeah, so I would say maybe not a finance strategic moment, but an important strategic moment for a finance leader. Because we often think about financial leadership as someone who's driving growth in the business, profitability, maximizing shareholder values, all true, but not complete. And I go back to 2020 at the start of the pandemic. We were all home. We were one of the first companies to pull our sales force out of the field and send employees to work remotely. And when we did that and we started to look at the organization, we started looking at what's happening in the community around us. So the strategic moment I'm referring to is the role of an organization and a finance leader in the community. Critically important. And by the way, we talk about ESG, but I don't think you can run a firm successfully over many, many years without having a clear line of sight to your role in the community. And one of the things we've noticed, for example, in our headquarters in Indianapolis, Indiana, one of the challenges you may recall was in the early days, there were not sufficient tests to test people for COVID. And that was a real gap. And we decided we're going to step in. We're not a medical device company. We're not a hospital, but we've decided we step in. It's at our cost. And we set up a testing site right here at the bottom of our building. And we had, I want to say 40 to 50% of all tests in the state of Indiana went through us. And we stepped in. Now, as a finance person, a CFO may look at this and say, what are the costs that are going to be required to establish that? What are the set of risks? There are risks associated with deciding to move forward with something like this. And that's a traditional finance thinking. And certainly we knew what those are, but we decided to move forward. And we didn't stop there. We then decided to develop a therapeutics, an antibody treatment for COVID, which was outside of our business. And well, obviously we want to understand profitability and cost structure. The key decision driver for us, so this goes back to what our kind of operating principles are, was that we are a company that advances healthcare for the communities we're in worldwide. And this was a critical healthcare need at that time. And we stepped in and we delivered it. And we played a really important role here in the city. We played an important role worldwide with the therapeutics we then launched within less than a year. And that was an important moment because that's a moment that as a CFO, you understand that, and I wasn't the CFO back then, but you understand that when you make critical business decisions, you want to understand the numbers and the business case, all that is critical, but you also want to understand the consequences and the ramification that your decisions have on the broader community that you operate within. So you make the right decision for your employee base and the community you operate in. It's a balance, obviously. But that, it brought to the, kind of to the forefront our core principles. And when we operated as one team, we call this Team Lilly, and we're unified around our principles, we deliver like no one else. We deliver incredibly well in this organization across whatever part of this organization it is. And every part of our organization stepped in, stepped up and delivered. And that's important learnings. And I think that's a learning that all of us that were part of these decisions will carry these with us forever. You always look at kind of the comprehensive set of implications on every business decision you make.
Hi, it's Jack. I hope you're enjoying our discussion with CFO Anat Ashkenazi. I made these notes earlier as we opened up the podcast. She quickly gave us 3 items. She was explaining what has kept her at Eli Lilly. Number 1, what we do. That's why I'm here. Organization. The organization bet on me. Time and time again, she feels she was given the opportunities to prove herself. And it's about who I work with. Those are my 3 notes from earlier. I think there could not be more spot on as far as what keeps people in organizations today. All right, we now return to our interview with CFO Anat Ashkenazi. We're going to jump to what we refer to as our mentoring round, where I get to ask you several quick questions intended to inform and inspire future finance leaders. We want you to think back to the first 60 days that you stepped into after stepping into the role as CFO of Eli Lilly. And if there was a piece of advice, if you could go back in time, it wasn't all that long ago, but I'm sure it seems like it. If you could give yourself a piece of advice now, looking back, just one piece of advice, anything come to mind?
You know, it's hard because I stepped into this role when we were all working remotely. So I guess my advice probably for people would be different if you're in person versus remote. And it's hard, right? I remember walking into this office the day we announced that I'm taking on the CFO role, and there were 4 people on the floor. And, you know, the building was empty. People were not coming. We instructed people not to come in. And it's very different because you don't have kind of the organization around you even to bounce questions off or have a quick conversation in the cafeteria with someone. And you have to figure out very quickly how you do this in an environment that's all virtual, and, you know, people may have been struggling in different phases, etc. I would say trying to build those connections quickly with the management team you're going to be working with every day is important. And again, very difficult to do when you're virtual. And that's one of the things, you know, I had to figure out, how do I get this done? And when we went back to the office, it was a little easier because we're sitting next to each other. You can walk into someone's office and have a chat. But I would, that would be the first kind of one of the things that I would recommend. Now, I think it does matter where you come from and what your background is. It was a little easier for me, just given the set of experiences I've had. I already led about half the finance organization in my previous role. So it makes it a little easier. I knew everyone. I knew my lead team. I have an excellent lead team. So I didn't have to come in and do wholesale changes, which sometimes is needed. But that would be the second thing I would say, is quickly assess the organization and understand if you have the right team, because in these roles, these are very broad, big roles, and you'll get pulled into multiple directions. And if you don't have an excellent team working with you, you will not be able to deliver great results. I've done it in other roles that I've had, a quick assessments, and I've had cases where in the first 6 months, I've rotated half the team, and I wasn't scared of doing that. And typically it's for the better. Matching the right person with the right opportunity is critical. So I would say build a relationship, build the understanding and familiarity with the investment community, which I referenced earlier through the listening tour. Assess your team. Do you have the right people in the right jobs? And again, fortunately, I really have a good team of people that I've known for many years because I've worked with them, that I didn't have to go through that massive organizational change. But if it's required, it's okay to do. I wouldn't shy away from that if it's needed.
We always like to ask our guests to reflect a little bit on the personal side, and this is probably the hardest question for most of our guests. But we're wondering if you have a personal habit or part of a daily routine, and we're really thinking beyond the office in some ways. You know, this is something maybe a family member would point out, or a colleague who's known you for many years. That's how Annette does it. That's just the way she does things. Or this is a habit, something you do that kind of sets you apart. Anything come to mind?
I was thinking about this recently because I often read different books and interviews with successful executives, and they have this daily habit. They work out at 5 a.m. or they do yoga at 7, or they, read something before they go to sleep. And what I find about myself is I don't have these habits. And I think that's
In itself.
unique to me because I don't like the routine. I thrive on change. It's a personal trait. I enjoy doing different things and moving. So, if you look at my career, I moved every 2 or 3 years. I had a different role, completely different role. And, someone can say, well, you're starting with a blank sheet of paper every 2 years. That's got to be hard. It is hard, but I really enjoy it. I enjoy the challenge. I enjoy not going into an organization I don't necessarily know very well and learning quickly. I enjoy the learning piece. So I think if I personally had a routine, it would have been probably very difficult for me to do the same thing repeatedly. I like to change it. If I exercise, I try to change the place I exercise every year or 18 months. I find it more, it's more motivating, more uplifting, more exciting. But it works for different people. Different things work for different people. And, there are huge benefits to having a routine or something that you do daily. But for some people that thrive on change, maybe changing that routine every so often is not a bad thing. Now, I'll tell you one thing that I do because I have 3 young kids. One thing that I do every day when I'm back from the office and I park my car in the garage, I open my phone, my work phone, and I quickly look at everything just to make sure that, is there anything urgent I need to respond to before I walk through the door? Because when I do, I try to put my phone aside so that I'm focused on my family. And that is something that I do religiously, is I check my phone and then I put it on the side for a few hours where I don't check it. And people know that if there's an emergency, they call me because I'll hear the ring, but I'm not going to read the email necessarily if it's not urgent for those couple of hours.
Can I ask, is your family member, are they under the age of 10?
No, they're older. I have an older teenager and I have 3 between 11 and 17.
Okay. Oh, entering the pandemic during those years. Yeah.
Yes.
Special set of challenges there as well. So we always like to
Yeah.
ask if there's a book recommendation you might have for us. It doesn't have to be a business book. Might be something you escape with, but anything come to mind?
I have 2 that I would recommend. One is for, I would say, earlier in career. I would advise people to read that. And it's an old book. I read it 20 years ago, 21 years ago, probably. And it's called The Pyramid Principles by Barbara Minta. And it's a book that talks about how you communicate and how you distill problems, how you break down problems. And it's excellent. Those are very clear principles, easy to follow. I would recommend people to read it if it's still available for purchase if they haven't already. The second book is more on the personal side, and I read this, I can't remember how long ago, but this was a while ago, and it's called Tuesdays with Murray. And the name of the author escapes me now. It's a heartbreaking book that talks about a person who's dying and the interviews with them weekly as a professor. But it puts things in perspective for you in life, and it's a reminder. It's a good reminder of what truly matters, both in your professional and personal life, and they're not completely separate. Right? I see it as kind of integrated. You integrate your personal and professional life. That book provides a good reminder of the things that matter.
Nice choices for us. Thank you for those. And finally, we're up to our final question. We'd like to ask you to look forward for us over the next 12 months and share what your CFO priorities are for that 12-month period.
We have a major agenda in front of us at Lilly. We've just launched probably one of the talked about products in the industry for type 2 diabetes, and we're studying this product for obesity. And we're launching 4 more drugs by the end of the year, we'll have launched 4 new drugs in cancer, immunology, and Alzheimer's disease. So as an organization, we have to continue to drive growth in our existing base, launch new products, drive adoption of these products, make sure our customers have the right information in their hands, Our manufacturing organization has to address a much growing level of demand, and we have to continue to invest in our pipeline. So how do you balance? I talked earlier about the need to balance short-term, long-term. That's for me is the critical element as we move forward, is to manage that tension between the long-term and short-term and ensure we advance both of them at the same time. Second thing is around the risks that surround us. Everything we've seen the last 24 months is that the world around us is to some extent unpredictable, and there are things that are happening in the environment that could add a different layer of complexity to the organization. So that's a second set of things that we're working towards, is ensuring that we have right mitigations in place and that we have the right, what I call alert system, to let us know that these are the leading indicators, something may be happening that we should be paying attention to. Third, and certainly not last, is our people agenda. Across the organization, my organization, more specifically for me, is how do I ensure I have the right people in the right roles? So I talked about the matching, and I think that's really important. We bring excellent people into the company. How do you ensure they're actually in the roles where they can flourish the most? And identifying talent early, advancing them, giving them the skill set and the room to grow. Incredibly important. And now, post-pandemic, if we can say post-pandemic, I think what we have is a world where people can work remotely, so they can join a company in a different state and stay in their home here in Indiana. How do I ensure that they want to stay with Lilly? That is really important. High on my agenda is to ensure retention, and we retain people by ensuring that they feel that they come here every day, or if they're working from home, that they work on meaningful work and they have an organization that's going to support their career wherever that career needs to go, and that's going to give them challenges and opportunities that they see exciting, but will also allow them to disconnect and recharge. So, as an example, we're heading into the end of the year here, end of the year in December, holidays around the world. And we have in the US, we've instituted a shutdown. In December, we have a week where we close the facility and people go home and they rest and recover and recharge their batteries so they come fresh the following year. That's one of the messages I'm sending out to people. Make sure you leverage that. Use that opportunity to recharge, spend time with people you love, and come back excited for the next year, because we do have a massive agenda ahead of us we need to deliver.
Anat Ashkenazi, CFO of Eli Lilly. Thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Jack. It was a pleasure.
Hello, listeners. Do us a favor. Be certain to subscribe to CFO Thought Leader on Apple Podcasts, or if you're an Android user, check us out on Spotify or Google Play. If you like the show, please recommend it to a friend.